Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, Isabella, I'm here.
Yes, we are seeing you. Good morning and welcome to the second day of this symposium. So now we will start with the first panel of today. And I welcome the authors and Grazia Maria Facchechi, the moderator of this panel. Thank you very much, Grazia.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome back to the International Symposium on Archaeology of Colour. Thank you for joining us for today's live session. I'm Grazia Facchechi and I'm here, very happy to be here today. First, I must express my gratitude for the invitation as a member of the scientific committee and a moderator of this panel. So far, the symposium has been amazing. I've already learned a lot, so congratulations to the organizing committee. You did a really good job. Since it's the first panel of the day, let me say a little bit about the logistics for this live session. The audience can ask questions either by raising their hand or by writing them in the chat. So please type your questions or comments into chat as you think of them. We are not going to break between the panelists' presentations, but we will take time to take questions during the moderated discussion at the end. Since this is a panel with 3 presentations, we have 30 minutes for discussion, if I'm right. And I want to remind the panelists that their presentation should be a maximum of 20 minutes each. So I'm telling the speaker, please respect your speaking times. And now let's get started. Our 3 papers seems really promising. I welcome our first panelist, Ana Miranda. Ana Miranda, are you here?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Beautiful. Ana Miranda holds a PhD in history with a thesis on the learned men of Al-Andalus during the 11th century. Her main research lines are history of Al-Andalus and the history of the medieval Mediterranean. She's a postdoc fellow at the Archaeology of Colour project, in which she studies color production in a social, economic, and normative perspective. The title of Anna's paper is Beyond Art Technical Sources, Understanding Color Production in Andalusi Texts. So Anna, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Grazia. I will just try to share my presentation. Are you all seeing it? Can you?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. So let's get started. Thank you all again for being here. In the next 20 minutes, I will talk a little about my contribution to the Archaeology of Colour project. So the study of color production in Al-Andalus has been mostly directed towards art technical sources, from now on ATS, to simplify, such as Al-Kalaluzi's Tuaf al-Khawas, the treasures of the selected, the 13th century Andalusi compilation on ink-making receipts. The focus of the said research falls on the ingredients and procedures to create color. Despite its contribution to this field of study, the technique-centered approach tends to overlook social, economic, and cultural aspects of color making, such as the social perception towards dyes or color etiquette, for example, and also the context under which such manuals were produced. So in this presentation, I will seek to provide an overview on the contribution of coeval sources, mostly, though not limited to, Andalusi sources, for a more comprehensive insight on color production in Al-Andalus. But first of all, what is Al-Andalus? Al-Andalus refers to the Iberian Peninsula territory, which was under Islamic governance from 711 to 1492 Christian era. The period of Al-Andalus comprises different political stages, which correspond to different territorial extensions and dynamics with the remaining Muslim and Mediterranean world. In the first stage, the Emirate, here, map 1, Al-Andalus was dependent on Kairouan in today's Tunisia. Kairouan answered before the Umayyad Caliph settled in Damascus. In 750, the Umayyads were overthrown by the Abbasids, who settled in Baghdad. In 756, Al-Andalus became an independent emirate by the hand of a member of the Umayyads, who fled from Syria during such events. The second stage, the Caliphate, was established in 929 by Abd al-Rahman III as a response to both the Abbasid and the Fatimid rival caliphates established in Baghdad and Cairo, respectively. In 1031, after a long civil war, the Caliphate of Al-Andalus collapsed and around 30 petty kingdoms or taifas emerged. In this third stage, this third stage is called the Taifa period. The rulers of these petty kingdoms sought to replicate the Umayyad court model, which included the sponsorship of written culture as a symbol of power. In the following 2 centuries, Al-Andalus was annexed to the North African Berber empires. By the end of the 11th century, the Almoravid Empire, and by the middle of the 12th, the Almohad Empire. As we see in map 4, the Almoravid Empire started in the south, near the Niger and Senegal rivers, while the Almohad Empire stretched until today's Libya. As we see in the maps, Andalusi territory diminished as the Christians advanced towards the south. However, Al-Andalus was included in a wider commercial and cultural network which crossed the whole Maghreb and the remaining Muslim world. So around 1100, the Muslim world encompassed the area inside this orangish line. Circulation due to trade and religion promoted proximity between both north and south shores of the Mediterranean and promoted east-west cultural transfer and accentuated the Orientalization process. Color production in medieval Christian milieu may have also had Eastern influence via Al-Andalus. For example, Al-Kalaluzi, who was born in Estepona near Malaga, studied poetry, astronomy, and inheritance partition in Fez, Marrakech, and Agmat. So he might have been introduced to color-making techniques in such travels. Knowledge transfer had been key since the early centuries of Islam, and Andalusi rulers were also committed with such endeavor. For example, Caliph Abd al-Rahman III was offered a copy of Dioscorides de Materia Medica by the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII, which was translated in Al-Andalus. Arabic Latin book translation also increased during the 12th century. After the Christian conquest, Arabic Latin translations flourished in cities such as Toledo and Sevilla. For example, Gerard of Cremona was one of the most active translators who rendered several Arabic texts into Latin, such as Al-Ghazi's Kitab al-Mansuri, which we see on the screen. Al-Kalaluzi treatise, the 2022 English translation made by Lebanese color expert Joumana Medlej, was the starting point of this study, given its spatial and chronological overlapping with the medieval sculptures, which are being studied by the project team. Firstly, nearly 100 ingredients used to produce color were identified, alongside with other related techniques such as removing ink from several surfaces. Secondly, other types of sources were analyzed in search for references to such ingredients and color-making activities. These sources were classified as geographical, normative, technical and epistolary. So let's take a more detailed look at each one of these types of sources. Geographical sources correspond to the literary genre al-Masalik wa al-Mamalik, meaning the roads of roads and kingdoms, the books of roads and kingdoms. The oldest surviving specimen dates from the 9th century in the Khorasan, in today's Iran. It describes the main cities and villages throughout the commercial routes, their resources, the peoples who inhabited it, the history, and also the travel time between cities. So here are some of the authors who were already analyzed so far. As for normative sources, as the name suggests, they deal with rules and law. Here, two types of texts were studied, Hisba texts and compilations of Fatawa. Hisba means in Arabic something like common good. It also refers to the function of promoting the observation of the religious rules in urban milieu, especially in markets. The Muhtasib, like Ibn Abdun in Al-Andalus and Al-Shaizari in Syria, was the person entrusted with the Nisba. Regarding the compilation of Fatawa, a fatwa is a legal opinion issued by an expert in Islamic law. The 15th century Al-Wansharisi's compilation provides fatwa up to the 15th century, issued in the Islamic West, meaning Al-Andalus and the Maghreb. Regarding technical treatises, here we included texts on specific matters, such as taxation texts, namely the book on land taxation by Abu Yusuf Yaqub from the 8th century. Filaha texts, which provide information on gardening and farming, medical or veterinary texts, such as 13th century Ibn al-Baytar's Kitab al-Jami, which displays information on medical and veterinary uses of plants and minerals, and finally, culinary texts, such as the one written by Ibn Hazin al-Tujibi from Murcia. And at last, epistolary sources, namely the Geniza letters. The Geniza letters refers to correspondence exchanged between medieval Jewish traders who operated in the Mediterranean milieu, discovered at the Ben Ezra synagogue in Cairo. Many of these documents were written in Arabic and used the Hebrew alphabet, like the one on the image. They survived because they had the name of God in it, so they could not be destroyed, and were instead deposited in containers near the synagogues called the Genizas. Those which have been analyzed for the Archaeology of Colour project were studied and translated by Shlomo Dov Goitain. So let's have a look at some examples of what we can find in these sources referring to color production. For instance, geographer Ibn Khuhtahbig referred to Brazilwood's pharmacological properties, whose roots are, according to him, effective against deadly poisons. The 10th century geographer Ibn Hawqal said that Surt, I believe it's Sirte in today's Libya, was, quoting, visited by commercial ships which exported products such as alum, which is found in large quantities, end of quote. He also mentions leather fabrics, iron, lead, and mercury, which were exported towards the east. Also, in Al-Andalus, iron, mercury, and lead could be found. The 11th century Saltej-born geographer al-Bakri also mentioned the vast Andalusi production in alum, iron, and copper. Al-Bakri informed that the inhabitants of Sebab, presumably in today's Tunisia, cultivated indigo and, according to him, quoting, in the country of the Kutama, Kutama is a Berber tribe located in the north of present-day Algeria. So, as I was saying, in the country of the Kutama, excellent quality lapis lazuli is found, as well as copper and iron mines, end of quote. In fact, lapis lazuli, or what they thought it was lapis lazuli, is widely mentioned by geographers. The 12th century Ceuta-born Al-Idrisi described the Cordova main mosque ceiling. It had, according to him, cinnabar red, lead white, lapis lazuli, red lead oxide, verdigris, and antimony black. End of quote. The anonymous author of the decree also reported that among the improvements Caliph al-Hakam operated in the said building, chapters were, quoting, carved from a single block of marble, engraved and inlaid with lapis lazuli and gold in its upper and lower parts. End of quote. Also, according to the anonymous author of the decree, lapis lazuli was found in Lorca, Almeria, Baza, and Granada. Al-Imyari added that in the region of Lorca, besides lapis lazuli, there was also, quoting, a yellow ochre quarry and several red ochre quarries. Both are exported to numerous countries, end of quote. Not only Western authors had a word to say about Al-Andalus. The Persian author Al-Qazwini wrote, quoting, Al-Andalus is rich in gold, silver, lead, and iron mines, which are found everywhere. There are also mines of mercury, red sulfur, yellow sulfur, excellent cinnabar, tutti, and alum of all classes. There is also coal that looks like the one of Ispahan. Al-Idrisi provided information concerning mercury and cinnabar mines located near the fort of Abal, which is in near Obejo, near Cordova, which employed around 1,000 workers. Al-Imyari raised that number to 3,000 workers who were organized in the following way, quoting, there is a team that goes down and extracts the mineral, another that transports the wood needed for the oven, another that manufactures the containers in which the metal is distilled and purified, another, finally, who builds the ovens and watches the boiler. The distance to the bottom of the mine is said to be more than 100 fathoms. End of quote. The Egyptian encyclopedist Al-Nuairi provided also information regarding the acacia wood and resin. Quoting, this is the resin of the acacia tree, and it is used exclusively in compounds and is not suitable for anything else. That is because it dissolves in water very quickly without clotting, while other resins that are gathered from flowering trees will corrupt a compound when they are added to it, such as sumac resin, rue resin, and marshmallow resin. End of quote. As for normative sources, according to Ibn Abdun, the Muhtasib of Seville, quoting, one must ban dyers who dye green with dyer's broom and sky blue with Brazil wood because it's a fraud, as these colors immediately disappear. End of quote. Also, saffron should not be sold in a paste from which pieces are cut because then it is counterfeit and bad, but rather in loose stigmas. End of quote. The Syrian al-Shaizari alerted to perfumers' scams involving the use of Brazil wood, quoting, some of the perfumers cut akshut. I really don't know what is akshut. If any of you wants to give me a highlight on this, I would appreciate. As I was saying, some of them perfumers cut akshut like the hair of hairy saffron and cook it with cooked Brazil wood. Then they add something to it dyed with saffron water and sprinkle a little ground sugar on to make it become heavy and coagulate. After this, they mix it with an equal amount of saffron and put it in the baskets. End of quote. A fatwa of fish is issued in the 13th century stated, a man who divorced his wife before the marriage had been consummated demands from her the safflower that she had asked for to dye her clothes. Unfortunately, we have no record if his claim was attended or not. Another fatwa, this one from Mahdiya, from the 12th century deals with the possibility of selling tartar to be used as a fixative to dye wool red. And the answer the Mufti gives is ambiguous. Quoting, "The question of impurity and purity of tartar is controversial. If we opt for its purity like vinegar, its sale is permitted. If we declare it impure, we can authorize its sale by analogy with that of garbage, which we use out of necessity to manure the earth." End of quote. Finally, and in an undated and unidentified fatwa, someone asked, "Is it fraud to whiten clothes with sulfur?" The answer, "This is not permitted. It's a fraud." Regarding technical texts, according to Abu Yusuf Yaqub's the taxation treaties, minerals such as, quoting, "ruby, turquoise, antimony, mercury, sulfur, and red ochre do not pay the fifth and are treated as clay and sand alike." End of quote. This means that during the conquests, a fifth of the land was due to the conquerors. And according to Yaqub and his school of law, no further taxation was applied to minerals which were found in it to avoid double taxation. In the agronomic field, the Toledo expert Ibn Basal wrote about the two classes of safflowers, one thorny and the other non-thorny, which was better to use in inks. Ibn al-Baitar listed the pharmacological benefits of the pomegranate, for example. It was good for stomach and digestion problems, fever, itching, scabies, drunkenness, ears and eyes inflammation, and its juice, quoting, "is beneficial against fat women's appetites." End of quote. So let's move on for a few more examples. Regarding culinary texts, Ibn Khazin al-Tujibi, he described how pomegranate arrived in Al-Andalus. Emir Abd al-Rahman the First in the 8th century, quoting, collected in his garden rare plants from every part of the world. He sent agents to Syria and other parts of the East to procure new plants and seeds. End of quote. So this was how, according to Ibn Khazin, pomegranate arrived in Al-Andalus. Finally, the letters of the Cairo Geniza provide information regarding several ink preparation ingredients. For example, a letter sent from Fez to Almeria from 1141 deals with the shipping of 7 loads of alum. It doesn't specify the weight of each load. The product was cheaper because the sender bought it before the official price had been announced. The sender in Fez said to the recipient, quoting, "Had I had courage, I would have sent you 100 quintars." Quintars is about 50 kilograms, so 100 quintars is 5 tons. "Had I had courage, I would have sent you 100 quintars, but I did not dare, since there was a great demand for it." End of quote. This means that the writer was afraid that many Spanish merchants would send alum to Almeria and its price would suddenly drop and it would provide no profit for anyone. The following letter shows how a father named Salan, while he was drunk, promised his son he would introduce him to the overseas trade. He said to the recipient of the letter, "If a bahar of luck which had fallen into the water comes your way, buy it for him. In case it does not, and the boy goes down to Alexandria, kindly advise him to leave you the money for such a buy until the occasion for it arises. Then you will buy it and send it to him." End of quote. In Goitein's interpretation, the father wished the boy to come home with a big sack. A bahar normally comprised about 300 pounds. But the father did not want to spend much money on it. So he asked the recipient to buy a damaged by water load of lac, which was cheaper. So these are just a few of the examples of the potential of other types of Arabic sources rather than ATS as a tool to understand color production in Al-Andalus. However, these sources and ATS as well pose some challenges. Arabic texts tend to replicate themselves over time. Respect for the autoritates is key, even if it is not clearly stated that they are quoting one. Vocabulary can also be misleading, as, for example, the word kuhl may not necessarily mean antimony, but the pencil which is used in eye makeup, which could also be made of galena. The same with lazwart, a word which was used interchangeably to name lapis lazuli and lazurite and other types of blue-colored stones. Another challenge is that among geographers, the use of secondary reports instead of in local observations, mostly in the case of non-Andalusi authors, may have distorted their view on reality. On the other hand, normative texts, especially fatwa, can also be challenging since they deal with specific situations. The legal opinion is frequently ambiguous, especially whenever the mufti addresses several inquiries in the same fatwa. Technical texts were written by an elite, and they fulfill the desire both of sponsors in portraying themselves as patrons of arts and sciences, but they also fulfill the desire of authors in portraying themselves as polymaths, even if they did not master or practice the art they were writing about. Finally, most letters of the Cairo Geniza do not mention Al-Andalus. Therefore, studies which rely exclusively on these documents may not be consistent enough. However, regardless of such limitations, we conclude that other texts beyond ATS can offer a multifaceted and broader view on color production in Al-Andalus, a view which seeks to understand the impact and relevance of color production in society. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for that, Anna. That was extremely interesting. So now let's hear from Laia Kutrina Gallart. And before that, I just want to remind everyone to feel free to type up and submit your questions or comments as you think of them. Laia Kutrina Gallart is a pre-doctoral researcher at the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, dedicating her doctoral thesis to the investigation of medieval polychromy in Catalan architectural sculpture. She collaborates with the research group Magistri Catalogne e Mediterranei and serves as a guide at the Monastery of Ripoll. Her research primarily centers on Romanesque art within the Crown of Aragon, particularly exploring its polychrome sculpture. The title of Laia's paper is A Hidden Splendor, the Color of Medieval Cloisters in Catalonia of the 12th and the 13th centuries. Please, Laia.
Grazie mille professoressa Facchechi per la presentazione e vado a condividere lo screen. So I'm going to share my presentation.
Yes,
can you see?
Yeah, we can see it perfectly. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much to the committee for inviting me to talk about this little part of my doctoral research about the color in the sculpture and architectural in the Catalonia, medieval Catalonia. Research on polychromy in Romanesque art represents a significant challenge in contemporary historiography. Recent advances in this area have been driven by reports from restoration projects, along with a new analysis dedicated to the medieval polychromy. These advances require us to consider conventional approaches to the role of color, its relationship to monumental sculpture, and its audience. For this reason, we must ask ourselves new questions such as, Why did polychromy have a decisive influence on the configuration of the iconography and iconology of works? How was it perceived by the faithful, or to what extent did it contribute to the transmission of the dogmatic message? Although notable examples, such as this Portico de la Gloria, are widely recognized, it is important to not forget other relevant cases of monumental sculpture and their particularities in the various territories of the Hispanic kingdoms. It is essential to explore and compare the polychrome vestiges that still survive to gain a more complete understanding of the technique of applying and receiving color of these works. In this context, the Catalan counties stand out as a paradigmatic example of color in the sculpture and architecture of the 12th and 13th centuries. The polychrome vestiges of their region represent a special case compared to the other territories of the Iberian Peninsula, both in terms of the quality and quantity of preserved examples. Currently, there are around 85 known polychrome cases in different territories that during the Middle Ages were part of the Crown of Aragon. Several factors contributed to the development and conservation of polychromy in this territory. Among them, geography played a crucial role, with the Pyrenees as a strategic source for specific minerals such as ironite, azurite, or malachite. Also, the trans-Pyrenean exchanges of pigments facilitated by contact with the south of France, as well as the itinerancy of workshops, were significant aspects. Another relevant factor for the conservation was the location and the way in which the polychrome remains were protected. Generally, it is observed that the original color is best preserved in the most protected parts of the sculptures or in those that have better resisted the effects of the climate and the passage of time. Within the Catalan polychrome monumental sculpture, two important case studies stand out, and you can see in the screen, the porticos of Ripoll and Agramunt. These examples are remarkable both for the quality and diversity of pictorial techniques preserved, which raises interesting questions about the reception and symbology of color. However, on this occasion, we will focus on another significant and little studied approach to polychromy in monumental sculpture, specifically in the medieval Catalan cloisters that still preserve polychrome vestiges. The current interpretation of color present in medieval Catalan cloisters is based on the polychrome vestiges that have survived to the present day. It is important to recognize that the hypotheses and assumptions formulated around this polychromy are influenced by the way in which these colors have come down to us and how they are presented today, which can distort our perception of the original appearance and magnificence that these monumental ensembles combined in their time. We only have chemical evidence of those that have been restored, as is in the case of some capitals of the cloister of Sant Cugat del Vallès. Despite these limitations, it is possible to identify common features in the polychrome capitals of the cloisters belonging to the Catalan counties. A predominant characteristic is the presence of red, ochre, and black colors, which have been preserved to a greater extent due to the chemical stability of their pigments, which has allowed them to better resist the passage of time. These colors are usually visible on the general surface of the capitals, although in more protected areas, other colors such as blues and greens can also be seen, whose shades have varied due to oxidation processes or other chemical changes. Unlike the application of polychromy in the large porticos, where higher quality pigments were used and were observed by a wider public, which influenced their dogmatic and didactic function, in the Catalan polychromy cloisters, mostly local or common pigments were used. For example, this color black vine used to be obtained by calcination of selected woods or fruits and seeds, known in Catalan as negra vinya, and in medieval artistic manuals as nigrum optimum because of its quality. This type of black is observed in various Catalan cloister groups, such as Sant Pere de Galligant, Sant Joan de les Abadeses, or Sant Cugat del Vallès, among others. For red, cinnabar or vermilion clays and minium were commonly employed. it should be noted that cinnabar and clays are the pigments that predominate in the preparation layers, as can be seen in these examples of Sant Cugat, Girona, Lluçà, and the capital of the disappeared cloister of the monastery of Sant Pere de Camprodon. The widespread and conspicuous application of red on both the faces and clothing of the figures is still a matter of debate. Despite this, several hypotheses have been proposed to explain why this technique was chosen in the flesh and clothing of the figures. The first theory suggested that the use of red in the flesh and hair could have functioned as a preliminary basis that served as a guide for the painter when applying the other pigments. Second, this technique could also have been employed to add rich nuance to subsequent pictorial layers. And the last theory states that the reddish hue could correspond to the residues of the red ball used in the preparation and application of gold or other metals, especially in the areas of clothing. These procedures illustrate the technical complexity of the application of color and the skill required by the polychrome craftsmen of monumental sculpture, whose mastery is described as a process of gradual learning, as described by Cennino Cennini in his work Il Libro dell'Arte. Continuing with the exploration of the colors and their materials used in polychromy, it is worth mentioning two special capitals that have preserved a blue patina. One of them is in the cloister of the monastery of Sant Cugat del Vallès, and the other in the cloister of the Cathedral of La Seu d'Urgell. Although we do not have chemical analysis of the leather of this Seu d'Urgell, capital 129 of Sant Cugat has been restored, providing valuable samples that reveal a complex composition. Samples taken from the garments indicate the presence of a binding medium of proteinaceous origin, along with a white base of lead and calcium carbonate, on which a bluish top layer is superimposed. This blue hue is obtained through a mixture of minerals that results in a lime blue or a verdigris. The intention behind this bluish patina is particularly interesting, as the restorer suggests that it could have sought to imitate the ultramarine blue obtained from lapis lazuli. However, a more complex mixture of minerals was chosen to achieve a pictorial layer that is chemically more resistant and stable against external conditions. In addition, other blue particles have been identified in the eye brown and pupil samples, along with the black vine and calcium carbonate, forming a weneda. This term described in treatises such as those by Theophilus and Cennini, which serve as a basis for the application of blue pigments. These color techniques, together with the discovery of porous fillers on several capitals of Sant Cugat, reflect the concern for the long-term preservation of polychromy. This underlines the importance of filling these spaces with color, since polychromy was not only a technical matter, but also a symbol and a means of reflecting on the most important dogmas of the Church. A complete restoration of the polychromy in the capitals of these medieval and Catalan cloisters could make it possible to highlight and value these ideas, which can already be glimpsed by simple observing the pictorial remains that have survived to the present day. Well, the study of sculptural polychromy not only gives us the opportunity to analyze the techniques employed by the artificers, but also to identify colorimetric and material similarities with other artistic ensembles, both inside and outside the territory, allowing us to make meaningful comparisons. These comparisons can be made in artistic ensembles from different places, but from the same territory, or in different works that are part of a single building. For example, in the monastery of Santa Maria de Ripoll, we find several relevant examples of a sculptural polychromy. This complex houses its paradigmatic Romanesque portico, polychrome and repainted. The Romanesque northwestern wing and the Gothic southwestern wing of the cloister with traces of color in several of its capitals. The polychrome image of Majestas Mariae in the southern wing of the cloister, and the basis of the old stone canopy, now exhibit in the Museu Nacional d'Art de Catalunya in Barcelona, which underwent a restoration report of the original color. All of them make up a polychrome program for the monumental sculpture of the monastery, presumably with the aim of creating a sense of aesthetic unity and evoking the colorful heavenly Jerusalem. In addition, there is a coherence in the use of the materials, particularly in the use of red obtained from clays and iron oxides, presenting the polychromy of all these works of the monastic complex, as well as in the Romanesque mural painting of the 11th century that is hidden behind the stone portico of the 12th century. Another type of comparison that can be examined through the use of color and its materials in nervy territories is through the material craftsmanship of the works. For example, the resemblance of red in the capitals of Ripoll, Sant Joan de les Abadesses, and Lluçà suggests a possible connection with the so-called Ripoll Sculptural Workshop, which is believed to have been not only the material architect of the capitals of these cloistered complexes, but also that of the portal, the monastery in the same town of Ripoll. We also have another relevant case, such as that of the figure of Arnau Cadell, architect and sculptor, who left a record of his self-portrait and signature in his sculptural work in the cloister of Sant Cugat del Vallès. This monastery shares a marked similarity in iconography and in the application of polychromy with another cloister designed by the same architect, that of Cathedral of Girona. It is possible to consider that in a similar way to existence of workshops or masters in charge of a sculpture in a territory, there were also artisans specialized in polychromy of these sculptures. It is likely that both professionals formed a collaborative binomial that allowed them to work together to enrich the artistic expression of the ensembles, both in their formal and chromatic aspects, while maintaining their role and professional status independently. The parallels in the use of color transcend contemporary territorial boundaries. It is observed that in areas that were previously under the jurisdiction of Crown of Aragon, the application of polychromy shows similarities both in technique and conservation with that found in the old Catalan counties, especially regarding the color red. This phenomenon is evident in the cloister of Monastery of San Juan de la Peña, in the Cathedral of Roda d'Isàvena, in the Collegiate Church of Santa Maria del Quézar, and in the Monastery of San Pedro el Viejo in Huesca. Similarly, a pattern can be seen in other ensembles located in the south of present-day France, which were also originally part of the crown, where parallels can be seen in the use of colors, such as in some capitals of the Cathedral of Elna, the Monastery of Sant Martí del Canigó, and the Priorat of Serrabona. Well, I could like to conclude this analysis of the chromatic splendor of the medieval cloisters of Catalan counties with a special mention of the cloisters of Sant Cugat del Vallès and Santa Maria de Lluçà previously mentioned. These two cloisters not only show a similar appearance characterized by the widespread presence of red on the surface of the capitals, but also share similarities in terms of the distribution of polychromy in their cloistered wings and their palpable wear on different capitals. I will refer to it as a topography of polychromy in the cloister. On the one hand, it can be seen how, in both cases, the north wing is the one that retains the less polychromy in its capitals, unlike the eastern and southern wings that host more polychrome capitals. On the other hand, it is striking that also in both cases, there is a more noticeable wear of polychromy in the capitals located in front of the door that connects the church with the cloister, and you can see with this green. This phenomenon could be linked to the performance of specific liturgical rites and blessings, such as, for example, performed on Palm Sunday, and the act of sprinkling holy water, which often contains salts, may have accelerated the process of degradation of the capitals and therefore of their polychromy. I am still studying this topic in my doctoral research. Well, based on the testimonies collected, it is possible to conclude that polychromy in medieval sculpture transcends its mere technique and practical application. This phenomenon urges us to undertake interdisciplinary research that explore the interrelationship of color with various disciplines, such as symbology, liturgy, and the role of the artist-painter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laia. Thank you for that. That was absolutely amazing, and a lot of beautiful materials. But we'll talk about that later. The last panelist for this session is another Ana. Ana Maria Cuesta Sanchez. I apologize if I mispronounced. Ana Maria is an art historian from the University of Madrid, the Complutense University of Madrid, and a PhD in Fine Arts. Her main lines of research are the analysis of the ornamental technique of polychromy on stone and its materials and methodological and practical issues in museums. The title of Ana Maria's paper is Color and Light, the metallic and pictorial decorations of the medieval sculptural ensemble for the refectory of the monastery of San Salvador de Oña, Burgos. The screen is yours, Ana.
Thank you very much, Gratia. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organization for accepting my proposal and allowing me to present it today. You can see the screen. It's all okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to present the results of my research work carried out in the monastery of San Salvador de Oña in Burgos, and on in particular piece that has proved to be exceptional for his manufacture and his materials. This proposal is briefly organized in 6 points that we deal, with the monastery and his history, the analyzed piece, a brief review of the applied methodology, and a study and interpretation of the results that will allow us to identify the pictorial techniques, the use of tin and color varnish, and the gild and the inlays that this piece presents. First, we have to locate the monastery. He's located in Spain, in the province of Burgos, in the north of the Iberian Peninsula. This monastery is located in a valley, has undergone numerous structural and religious changes throughout his history since his foundation. Some of the most obvious facts are those you can see on the screen. Length from his foundation on 1033 to all the Middle Ages period with facts like the sack of the monastery by the Black Prince of Wallace in 66 or 67, we don't know exactly, and other facts like the foundation of the Colegio Máximo by the Jesuits in 1888. Currently, the building has 3/4 abandoned, so that's the reality of the building right now. The piece that concerned us is this: is a discontextualized architectural ensemble currently exhibited on the chapter house, but originally located on the eastern wall of the refectory. This ensemble is composed of multiple pieces. We have 5 arcs, 4 capitals, 4 capital tops, 1 frieze with a Latin inscription, and 5 pieces with Gothic drawings have Gothic inscriptions. This piece was discovered during the remodeling works of the psychiatric kitchen in 1968 after it was walled up and mechanically exchanged from the wall. This piece has 3 decorative stages, as you can see on this scheme. The first is associated to the 12th and 13th century. The second is on the half of the 14th century, and the third decorative stage is located on the 15th century. The decorative motifs that predominate in this ensemble are varied. We have the first arc here with a smooth peralted and polychromy archivolts, and that present a rosette type 2. We have classified it like this. It's a combination of smooth and striated leaves with the same interior, or small and stylish leaves, all covered in gold and in green polychromy. We have the second and the fifth arc, which present outer archivolts with opposite trilobulate leaves, and the inner archivolt with sawtooth decoration, and 2 types of rosette. The type 1 is checkered with a center of fine stylish leaves, and the type 2 as the same of the first arc. And the arcs 3 and 4 are riveted and silhouetted exterior braids. This is a classic Borgonian motif, so we have to see here this influence. And it presents angles archivolt with pine cones and rosettes type 1. We have 4 capitals and capital tops with stylish vegetable decoration and some scrolls. It's all polychrome. The colors used on this ensemble are green, red, white, black, and visually we have blue and brown as a result of the degradation of the materials that present the ensemble. In order to fully analyze the wall as well as the strata and the material present in these samples, a mixed approach has been chosen. Based on one hand and the documentation and the sources, we have contrasted with visual examination in situ and laboratory analysis. In the later, techniques such as those you can see on the screen has been used on 26 samples, and we used 2 specialized laboratories to doing this area. Artelab and the Center of Research Assistant in Hair Science and Archaeometry in the Complutense University of Madrid. This analysis have allowed us to determine the material that make up the whole ensemble, and specifically the support, the pigments, the pictorial loads, the mortars, the metals, being able to find and classify them in different decorative stages of the piece. Also, we can determine the binders used here, such as linseed oil, colophon resin, and some drying oils that we can identify as well. After the realization and interpretation of this analysis, it has been possible to identify several pictorial and decorative techniques that are in this ensemble. The first of the pictorial techniques present here is oil painting. This painting is found in the whole complex, in all arcs and in all capital pieces, especially in the preparation. We have 2 types of preparations. You can see on the screen in the first images. We have one of the preparation is white and is on the support, and the other is orange and is on the white preparation. And in all the pictorial layers and of the 3 decorative periods, we can find linseed oil. The other technique that we can find it's dry painting on gypsum mortar. This kind of painting is located on the lunettes of the arcs. We have no testimonies that we have dry paintings in other places. This decoration belonged only to the third decorative stage between 1430 and 1460. Although no binders have been found in these samples, solubility analysis has been carried out to identify these binders. We use swabs that we have drawn with some traces of yellow, black, and to a lesser extent, orange ochre pigments. This revealed two hypotheses of the use of binder here. Either the use of lean tempera paint, such as gum or glue tempera, and the other hypothesis is the use of paint with a fatty binder, like oil, egg, or casein tempera, that has lost its stability and film forming capacity. But the most important here in this piece is probably the use of tin. You can see in the first images, the surface of the tin is located in more than in 18% of the piece, and is only dated in the second decorative period on the 14th century. This tin sometimes shows traces of other materials such lead and copper, evidencing the pictorial loads of lost superimposed materials that we don't know really what they are. These tin lengths have 5 nanometers to 15 nanometers in case that the material presents some degradation. You can see here the oxidation on the first images, and with the organoleptic analysis that we do in this piece, and with the light shining through, the imitation of the tin leaves and the oxidation can be seen. The analysis and cross sections have sometimes revealed the presence of translucent materials on the metals and on layers or flat color painting. On the metals application of arcs 3 and 4, we can find green coloration that have been revealed as copper resinates. These resinates provide an intense and translucent green color, changing the color of the underlying metal and maintaining its brightness. These resinates, traditionally dated to the 15th century in Europe, have a traceable use in Nasrid art, both in the plaster work of the Cuarto Real de Santo Domingo in 13th century, and in the wooden ceilings of the Alhambra Palace in the 13th century to 15th century. We have also the use of gold that we find in these pits that only belongs to the 30 decorative stage at the 15th century. It's bad on the screen. And we see this kind of gold that is used has a very good quality, it's very high quality. This gold of great purity could be obtained from coins, is usually obtained from coins, such as the gold doubloons of bust of 20 maravedis from the range of Henry II, or by the manufacturing process. Note at copellation. You have the tools on the screen. And finally, it is worth mentioning the possible use of inlays in which we have only the negative imprints. We discover using the UV light, and these images show the marks left in the resin by an nadir sharp object, and we have Inoña. This type of inlay with crystal heads or gems, glass, we don't know what is this kind of gems that we have in Inoña, can be seen in other places, such as the Cathedral of Notre Dame de la Charité-sur-Loire, where we find not only the punched hole, but it remains the inlays. And I would like to conclude this presentation with the idea that this piece presents an interpretative challenge, both in its form and its materiality, which we continue investigating and related to both continual Christian artistic centuries, such as the Andalusian ones. So thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Anna. That was stunning, in my opinion. Now we are going to move to the questions and answers portion, as long as we are allowed. I think 30 minutes, because we are perfect on time. So I'll check on the chat if there are questions. Yes, there are a few questions. Okay, so first of all, Noel, she's saying that she has a question for Ana Miranda. Ana Miranda, are you ready? Okay, whose presentation was terrific and incredibly inspiring. She's asking, she's wondering if is there evidence of interchange between Al-Andalus and non-Andalus traders and craftspeople in the sources that you have studied? This is the question.
Thank you, Noel, for your question. Well, the first example that came to my mind is a reference which is not on these sources that I have talked about, but on an historical source authored by Ibn Hayyan called Muktabish, and he talks about the construction of Medina Azara near Cordoba in the 10th century. And there is a reference regarding the employment of Byzantine workers in the palace. They were somehow responsible for the introduction of, in a wider scale, of green and manganese tiles. That's I can put the name of the author in the chat. Ibn Hayyan, Muktabish, I believe it's Muktabish the Fifth. I'm not sure if you all have access to this. I don't understand very well the use of this chat. Well, anyway, I can't remember at the moment other examples of exchange between craftsmen. I think there is kind of a divorce between the world of written knowledge on the technical matters and the world of craftsmen. It seems to me that this type of knowledge was more to share among, to be shared among intellectuals rather than to be followed in everyday life. Probably there are more references, especially in the letters of the Cairo Geniza. There might be more references, and basically these letters were exchanged among traders. But references of circulation of craftsmen, I didn't find almost none. And the only one that I can record right now is that one regarding the Byzantine workers in Medina Azara. I believe there is another question for me.
Yeah, there is another question by Alberto Virdis. He's asking, of course, he's congratulating you on the interesting paper. Are there information about the availability of lapis lazuli in Andalus? What it considered a rare and extremely valuable material as it was in the rest of Europe throughout the Middle Ages?
Well, thank you also, Alberto, for your question. I think the number of references to lapis lazuli in Al-Andalus is very suspicious, and I think that it has to do with vocabulary. Geographers could be talking about azurite, for example, and not exactly lapis lazuli, because al-azwar, which is the Arabic name, means something just like blue stone. So it can refer to other things that are not exactly lapis lazuli. So also these written works were commissioned by kings, by caliphs, by figures of power. So it's very good for them to be that their territory is portrayed as having such wonderful raw materials and precious gems and all that. So we have to be a bit suspicious about this, and we have to be skeptical about this and cross this information with studies in geology, for example, which I haven't done yet. Alberto, I think we must be very cautious about these references. Thank you.
Okay, since you are there, Anna, there is another question for you from Jan Orstegard. What do we know of the kind of containers used in trade export of pigments?
Well, that sort of information is more in the Cairo Geniza letters. I frankly didn't pay much attention to it. Some of them refer the costs. I remember that the transport of alum from the western from the west to the east, that alum was in containers which had also a price, one dirham for a container. Regarding the materials and size, I haven't dug much further on it, but I think it's interesting because it's the question which is kind of neglected. We focus on the raw materials and not on the containers for their transportation. So I do not have an answer, a very direct answer to it. But I think it's very important that you have reminded me that topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. I don't know if the audience want to reply to Anna. In the meantime, following the order of the speakers, there is a question from Kaya. Hi, Kaya. Long time no see. She says, I have a question to the beautiful presentation from Laia. Did I understand you correctly that in one of your examples, vermilion was used for the scenes of a heavenly Jerusalem, while other pigments such as red ochre was used for more secular architectural details? This is a very interesting question.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Kaya or Kaya? Kaya. Okay. Thank you very much for your question. It's so interesting. Generally, we see a combination of different pigments. It's true that vermilion or cinnabar are common in the sculptural medieval Catalan cloisters and porticos, but it's true that in the capitals or scenes where there are biblical or important characters, the highest quality pigments are generally chosen. This is seen especially in the porticos. It is a whole theme of symbology and demonstration of power that is reflected very well in the study of monumental polychromy. So this is a topic very interesting.
Yes, it is, for sure. I want to ask you, Laia, if you already published your research, or are you?
I published a research about generally the porticos of Catalan counties, but this topic of the cloisters, it's new. So I explained for the first time here, and I'm going to publish these first results in the Conservar Patrimonio paper.
Perfect. Okay, we're looking forward to it.
And then in my doctoral research, but I'm a study, so later.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm checking on the, okay, Jan, okay, sorry.
Maria João Melo has a question before
yeah,
Kaya.
Of course, yeah. Isabel, I don't. So what did you say, Isabel? I didn't hear you.
Sorry, Maria João Melo has a question before Kaya question, so I can read it. Wonderful presentations. Congratulations to all the speakers. Perfect and beautiful slides in Ana Maria Cuesta's presentation. Are these research and results already published? Is to Ana Maria Cuesta.
To Ana Maria, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, first approximation of this study was published in the magazine De Medioevo in February, although I'm currently writing a specialized article on the use of tin and color varnish, as well as metallic applications, but in the near future, I have to say.
Good. I don't know if someone from the audience want to
also
ask.
Marcus Slitz raised his hand.
Yes, thank you. I would have a question, or even just a technical demand about the presentation of Ana Miranda. I did not grasp what was the site of the, I think, cinnabar or sulfur mine, which employed first 1,000 workers and 3,000 workers. And is this text available in traduction? Because I don't read the Arab. And I think you already answered to a second question I had also concerning lapis lazuli or the blue pigments. I wondered if the commentators or the writers of these times, the Arab writers, confused, amalgamated azurite and lapis lazuli, or also in their mind, was there a distinction between the two materials for them, or judged they only by looking at a blue capital, or how do you think this this works?
Thank you for your question. Regarding the mercury and cinnabar mines, they are Alidrisi and Alimiari mentioned them, and Alidrisi says it's near the fort of Abal, which is near Córdoba, in a place called Obejo, O-B-E-J-O, Obejo, near Córdoba.
Thank you.
And regarding the lapis lazuli azurite question, I really don't have a straight answer to that. I think that I'm not sure if they knew the difference between them, And the texts in the texts they produce, they don't evidence that they know the difference, and so these texts have to be crossed with studies in other areas to understand if there is a correspondence between them. But from what I have read so far regarding studies in geology, and which I confess it was not much, I believe there were some remains of azurite near the region of Almeria, for example. There are some studies that mentioned it. I don't know any details about that, but I think they mixed. They applied the same words to describe different things. They weren't really aware of the differences.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think there is it's a comment by Lynn. Gosh, so much wonderful information to absorb. Thank you all. Laia, do you plan to extend your work on comparing ground layers across sites? I would be happy to share cross-section of red ground layers found in medieval sculpture in UK if of interest.
Thank you very much. Right now, I don't know, because there are a lot of information for analyze in my doctoral research, but I think this is so interesting. So if you want, you can write me in the email that I wrote in the chat. It's laia.cotrina@uab.cat, and we can talk about this because I think this is so interesting.
Can I ask you a question, Laia, since you have the microphone on? I want to ask if the capitals of the Catalan cloisters could have been repainted with other colors, as happens with some of their Romanesque porticos?
Yes, in fact, the capital 129 of Sant Cugat del Vallès that we seen early presents subsequent repainting that, together with the original polychromy, forms a total of 7 stratigraphic layers. The original polychromy is probably from the beginning of 13th century, and the repaintings could be dated of the second half of the 13th century, coinciding with the reforms that took place in the monastic complex. That this is very interesting. And with this example, we can see that not only the porticos were important to be polychrome, but also the cloisters had to have the color updated to the aesthetics of each era. So yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And I have a question also for Ana Maria Cuesta Sanchez. Questions about the possible references of the extensive use of tin or some colors that can be seen in Oña.
Okay. Well, we have hardly been able to find any references to the extensive use of tin in Europe made in similar way that we found in Oña, although we can find not only this material, but also other associated materials such as copper resinate in material evidence associated with Nazareth kingdoms of Granada. And this, together with other circumstances associated with royal power, suggested the possibility of artistic transmission from this source to Oña in the 14th century, and is a little bit complex question, but we are going to investigate it more in the near future.
Good, thank you. I'm seeing, okay, Isabel raised her hand. Go.
It was a wonderful morning start. I have a question to Laia, because I see a lot of information, but I don't see it published. So I was wondering about your methodology. So what type of documents are you reading? It's like reports that are made by conservators that are within museums, or where are they? Or I'm really curious about all this information, because it's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel. It's so hard to study the polychromy in these ensembles, because we only have the information restorations of these ensembles. This is the only information, and the other things is the observe directly the color that preserved today. So, for example, Sant Cugat is the only ensemble that we can have a precisely information of the restoration, but the other cases we need to do a new methodology for studying.
Okay, so but the information that you have so far is from the reports, is it?
Yes.
And
yes.
And they are in museums, or they are published, or do you have access to it? It's like because we have a lot of problems having access to this type of information in our reports and the conservation reports. So it's like I was wondering.
Yes, they are reports, and I need to ask for example, the Center of Restoration of Catalonia for having these reports, because this is not published online, and they are not so happy to share it because, well, you know that restoration and history of art need to ensemble better, but yes, is with the Center of Restoration of Catalonia that I can have this information, technical information.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Otherwise, I don't know.
Yes, there is a question.
Good, Jan. Go.
Yeah, excuse me.
Oh, Jan.
Well, I was waiting for the moment when you were saying there were no more questions, because as you will know, I come from classical archaeology and the polychromy of Greek and Roman architecture and sculpture. So I've sort of kept back a little, but I just wanted to explain that my question to Anne Miranda had to do with the fact that what is now, or within the last 2 decades or 3 decades, is becoming increasingly apparent, is that pigments were needed in quantities that we had never imagined. I mean, really large quantities. I mean, for buildings and for sculpture, and so they enter into trade patterns and the provenancing of the pigments, and I mean the whole logistic scene becomes really more and more interesting. And this is why I asked a question about the containers used, because just to exemplify that very briefly, that Constanze Höpken published an article in the Bonner Jahrbücher in 2016 on the results of her examination of an incredible number of Baetica Dressels 32 amphora fragments from the Rhine, on which she found the inscription saying Ceruleum, so that the containers, the amphora, were not just used for wine and for olive oil, and it begins to appear more and more necessary to get an understanding of how the finished pigments were transported and distributed. And it's a kind of a very tiresome exercise to look on fragments of amphorae on their insides and on their outsides. But I can only encourage Anna Miranda, and I really thank you very much, Anna Miranda, for this really excellent paper. And it's just to say that what is going on in ancient classical Greek and Roman polychromy studies, to my mind, appears to be very parallel to what is going on in the field examined by this excellent conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you. So, other questions, comments? Anything?
Can I have? Can I just
Yes,
make
sure.
a brief comment to Jan's comment? I remember, in the meanwhile, I remembered that according to a Geneva letter, several products were wrapped in old underpants. This is interesting because everything was used and reused to accommodate goods.
So bags of textile bags.
Yes, but I believe they were inside other
Okay, larger. Okay.
It was just to accommodate.
Yeah.
And this leads to another question, that many of these materials which involved the goods were perished over time.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
So I remember of a reference to an indigo load which was lost at sea, and it had the inscription of the name, or the name of the owner on it. So it's this question related with the containers raises a lot of other questions. That the fact that most of the many of those containers were made in perishable materials. So it's a never-ending question.
But they might have had seals
Yes,
of a
yes,
more permanent material.
yes. They might have. Yes, it's a very interesting topic to think about. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
just want to, I
question.
just answer to Ian by a message, but the amount of information that Anna collects is enormous. It's like every week she sends me information and I read it because it's wonderful reading. So I keep my weekends to read information that Anna sends to me because it's very interesting and very funny as well. I remember some baskets, some other containers. So we will have a look on that information, and then we will let you know, because that's what you say, and that's the spirit of the symposium. Sometimes we are so focused on pigments that we lose the.
And it is allowed to have fun while you work.
Yes, it is my main objective, is to have fun when I work. Is my so we also have, because it's not only by sea. Anna, I remember the camels, the
Donkeys.
all those.
Yeah.
Okay, just to add this information, but we will let you know. We will be making notes of that, and I will let you know.
So time is running out. I think we are perfect on time. I'm wrong? No, it's okay. And so before leaving, congratulations on your research, and thank you everyone for participating in this panel. Enjoy the rest of the super interesting symposium, and thanks again to Isabel.
Thank you, Gratia.
Have a nice day.
And we will be back at 11 for the second panel. Okay, so we will have a break. Thank you very much for all the authors and the moderator and all the questions raised. Thank you very much. See you in a minute. Bye.
See you.
Hello again. I welcome the second panel of today. And I welcome the moderator, Elizabeth Zobieski. I hope I pronounce it okay. So you can start, Elizabeth, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Yes, so thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Okay.
Perfectly.
Yeah, so welcome everybody to our second session today. And also thank you very much to the organizers for putting together this really wonderful conference, very inspiring conference, I must say. So again, in this session, we have 3 talks, so each of them about 20 minutes. So please, dear speakers, stick to these 20 minutes. And in the end, we will have a discussion. So the audience, of course, can write the questions already during the talks in the chat, and after the 3 talks, we will have the discussion, and of course, you can write your hand. So let's start with this section. We are now moving forward a little in time, so from the High Middle Ages to the 14th to 16th century, and also to a different region. The objects presented in this section here coming from Asia and the Upper Adriatic region and Tuscany, and they are made from different materials such as wood, and, stone, glass, terracotta. So different materials, different ways of processing them. So various ways of producing and manipulating light and color and on the surfaces of the sculpture. So we're very happy to have our speakers here to share their research and their thoughts. And now let's welcome our first speaker, Mateusz Remczka. He's an art historian and conservator working at the Institute for the Protection of Cultural Heritage of Slovenia. His research focuses on late medieval art production, particularly in the region of Slovenia and the Adriatic. Presently, he is dedicated to the development of a doctoral dissertation at the University of Ljubljana, delving into the subject of the production of painting during the first half of the 15th century in Dubrovnik. He has published several scientific contributions on the topic of Gothic art and theoretical aspects of cultural heritage preservation. The title of his talk today is Crafting Culture in the Adriatic, the case of woodcarvers and painters in Quattrocento, Dubrovnik. We are very happy to have you here, and we are looking forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks to the organizers for accepting my contribution. Let me try to share the screen as fast as possible. Is it working? Yeah, okay. So good morning, everyone. My topic will be more on the historic side of the polychromy, discussing some of the aspects on wood carvers and painters in 15th century Dubrovnik. So when I was working on my research on Dubrovnik painting of the 15th century, an interesting contract caught my attention. It was one of the numerous Dubrovnik contracts between a patron and an artist concluded in the summer of 1449. Ivan Pripčinović commissioned a painting, Unum Quadrum, from the painter Ivan Ugrinović. However, since the desired painting was not received within the agreed upon deadline of 2 months, he placed an exact same order with the woodcarver, Radoslav Vukcic. In fact, the notary only replaced the name with another, while all other provisions of the contract remained the same, identical. So the same order was now placed with someone of different profession. We may never learn the circumstances related to the described case, but the contract can certainly prompt reflection on the relationship between painters and carvers in medieval Dubrovnik and broader Adriatic milieu. When examining polychromed wood artworks, it's commonly believed that medieval painters were also skilled wood carvers and vice versa. Contrary to the expected trend of specialization by 13th and 14th century, in the middle of 15th century, we encounter various examples showcasing the versatility of these artists. We come across a range of examples when woodcarvers often gilded and painted their own artworks, while painters were also capable of carving wooden statues. Joško Belamarić highlighted the case of Juraj Petrović from Split, who in the mid-15th century served as primicerius of the cathedral chapter of St. Doimus, while also working as both a woodcarver and a painter. For example, Lovro Dobričević, perhaps the most characteristic representative of the early Renaissance in Dubrovnik and Bay of Kotor, who art history has exclusively treated as a painter, which undoubtedly was also his identity, appears in two documents as Magister Laurentius de Cataro, Intagliator et Pictor. Before we look into some examples that shed light on the altarpiece making process, let's briefly look at the circumstances in which these processes occurred. Medieval Ragusa was a prominent maritime republic known for its strategic location along trade routes connecting the Mediterranean with the Balkans. Dubrovnik enjoyed full statehood by 15th century, with Venetian Dalmatia on the north and Venetian Albania on the south. Economic and political prosperity and close links with the Apennine Peninsula, especially Ancona and Kingdom of Naples, enabled Dubrovnik to develop its urban center in the 14th and first half of the 15th century by all the modern standards of the wider region of the time, which of course also allowed a rich production of artworks to flourish. Unfortunately, not even 10th of the altarpieces from late Middle Ages and early modern times have been preserved, but well-preserved and partially already published archival sources provide a sufficiently detailed insight into the organization of artistic activity, especially after the 1275, when even minor credit transactions needed to be recorded by official city notaries. So my presentation does not, that's the reason why the presentation does not show many of the artworks, because very little of them are preserved. But luckily, the archival documentation in Dubrovnik is exceptionally well preserved, enabling a high quality analytical approach to researching various issues. The Dubrovnik notary, that unlike the Venetian system, was part of the state structure, documented private transactions, including promissory notes, sales contracts, leases, slave sales, dowry receipts, debt repayments, etc. Let's take a brief look at the finances. So painters were definitely not as fortunate in terms of social status as, for example, architects. Jorio Tadić observed that Dubrovnik painters belonged to the lower social classes, being ordinary craftsmen, as he wrote, sons of peasants. He even wrote city poor. Majority of craftsmen involved with paint also identified with other occupations, such as cabinet and chest makers, woodworkers. They worked with gunpowder, were shield makers, saddlers, etc. Certainly, only some of the painters can be included in the canon of artists who rose above ordinary craftsmen and undertook commissions for the most prestigious painting task of that time in the Adriatic region, like altarpieces. It's important to highlight that total cost of the painting during the 15th century was impacted by several factors, including the materials, the quality and variety of wood, paint, type of gold. Maybe the biggest factor were expenses associated with labor. The cost of wood carving in Apennine Peninsula varied from around 15 to 30% at best. Previous scholarship asserted that Dubrovnik saw the creation of monumental and highly representative altarpieces, where both the painterly and sculptural contributions were equally valued. A systematic review of all documented commissions for polyptychs in the second quarter of the 15th century, so that has not been done for the whole century, shows that carving component usually amounted to less than 30% of the price. So the situation was similar than elsewhere in the Adriatic. However, in one instance, it's accounted so the wood carving part accounted for as much as 48%. That is still insufficient to claim that both contributions were equally valued. Collaborative endeavors among numerous masters are evident from historical records, but on the contrary to what some previous researchers claimed, we cannot state that it was common for painters and wood carvers in Dubrovnik to share a workshop or a production space. It is far more likely that each master owned or rented their own bottega and hired an assistant or apprentice that specialized in an area that was less favored by the master. For example, Radoslav Vukčić, by far the most sought after and well-profiled sculptor in wood in the first half and mid 15th century, acquired his education from a painter, Blaž Jurjov, Biagio di Giorgio da Trau. They entered a typical apprenticeship contract. Radoslav lived and worked with master Blaž Jurjov, while a master in return promised to take care of him, to take care of the young apprentice in health and sickness, and to teach him the art of painting to the best of his abilities. That means that Blaž's bottega at the time consisted of at least two apprentices. Martin Petković from Jajce, that later turned out to be a painter, and Radoslav Vukčić, that later went on to be a woodcarver. Creighton Gilbert in 1977, commenting on Martin Wackernagel's writing on Quattrocento Florence, claimed that we shall never find a woodcarver employed in the artist's studio. But it looks like Blaž's bottega was self-sufficient, and that may be the reason that we do not have any commissions, any known commissions where Blaž would accept work with another master. So it was often, as it was often the case with other artists. Woodcarver Radosov's son, I find that interesting. Matko Alegretović turned out to be a painter. So this doesn't make it, this is not a big a big discovery, as mostly because painters always finished a product and they signed the polyptych. But I think it's interesting that the only signature that we have from Blaž was found on the wooden sculpture of Saint Jakob. Collaboration between the most popular painter in Dubrovnik, whose rise began immediately after Blaž's departure, Ivan Ugrinović, with Radoslav Vukčić, already mentioned woodcarver, was almost exclusive. Ivan very rarely worked with other sculptures, while Radoslav with other painters, while they both functioned as individuals. Whether the collaboration between Ugrinović and Vukčić was temporary, limited to a specific project, or organized in a more formal manner is not known. However, it can be assumed that the relationship between Ivan Ugrinović and his son Stjepan was based on the principle of paternae companiae. Contracts between the joint workshops are indeed found among the documents of Dubrovnik, but none between woodcarvers and painters. In 1456, for example, Petar Ognjanović and Stjepan Ugrinović, both were painters, entered into an agreement. They worked in premises owned by Petar, who provided materials, chalk and pigments, while Stjepan was responsible for painting and carving. Stjepan did not have to pay for materials or accommodation in the room above the workshop. We also have another case where painters Franko Miljović and Franjo Marinović agreed to work together diligently and share the earnings equally in half. An interesting business agreement was made in 1442 between Ivan Ognjanović and Ivan Ugrinović. Ugrinović promised Ognjanović that as long as he lived in Dubrovnik, he would only paint chests for him and only with his consent. To fulfill this commitment, Ognjanović paid him 4 ducats, so 4 ducats in advance. And for each chest that Ugrinović painted for Ognjanović, he would receive 2 perpers. Patrons also seemingly played a certain role in the area. Martin Wackernagel, an expert on studio working conditions, noted that it was not uncommon for clients in 15th century Florence to commission panels from woodcarvers before painters took possession of them. But the lack of substantial evidence for the specific practice suggests that it cannot be accepted as a widespread norm. So Creighton Gilbert in 77 claimed that Wackernagel's assertion is well-founded, but is perhaps too tentative. Gilbert claimed that we shall also see another custom in which the painter subcontracts the panel to a woodworker. Both types of commissions are evident in Dubrovnik. Several commissions align with the thesis laid by Wackernagel, from gilding smaller carved pictures to coloring big altarpieces. In 1439, for example, Lorenzo da Florentia undertook to paint in colors and with figures and to gild the carved altarpiece made by Radoslav Vukčić for 40 ducats. The same day, the patron Florio Radoslav Turcini commissioned that carved wooden base for the Church of Saint Dominic for 17 ducats. In fact, most orders accepted by Radoslav Vukčić himself were for the execution of the carved part of the product, essentially for a semi-finished product that the client would take to the painter and order polychromy. And that polychromy would actually cost more than the carving. clauses in contracts where the painter takes responsibility for making the wooden base or carving on the painting, or carvings on the painting, or negotiates for the payment of wooden materials and carpentry work, were common in the contracts of the time in Dubrovnik. Many documents mention painters who are required to facere et construere unum tabulam, or construct some wooden barrier and corresponding reliefs, ornaments. With these provisions, the contract encompassed all aspects included in the price, detailing what the artist executor must furnish to the patron of the altarpiece for the agreed upon price. Additionally, it was customary for the painter to oversee carpentry tasks during the fabrication of the altarpiece. In one case, in 1442, Ugrinovich promised to take care of everything needed to make an icon of Madonna. So the icon I'm showing is not made by Ivan Ugrinovich, but unfortunately there is none existing works made by Ugrinovich. So he agreed to take care of everything except for the wooden part that was explicitly, so the client, Ivan Palmotic, explicitly committed to providing the wood. It seems that Ivan Ugrinovich did not fulfill the commission for a long time, and 4 years later, he finally reaches an agreement with the patron, and Ugrinovich completes the image of Madonna with the child on a wooden base, which, as we can learn from the newer document, was made again by Radoslav Vukčić. In most cases, polychromy executed by woodcarvers likely involved simply polychromy executed by woodcarvers involved simply applying paint and gold to frame elements, pinnacles, finials, and other sculpture components, perhaps even painting carved figures. We cannot say that for sure, but it did not extend to painting figures on a two-dimensional surfaces. So to conclude, in Dubrovnik, we have archival sources that are exceptional, even in a broader context. There are few masters operating at the same time because the community was very small, and that were able to make bigger pieces like altarpieces. So the relationship between the patron and the master, carver or a painter, is pretty much transparent. However, relationships between the workshop remain unclear. Therefore, in most cases, it is not possible to determine whether the painter himself also made the carving part, or whether he had an assistant carver employed in his bottega. Unfortunately, in Dubrovnik, we do not have enough preserved works that could be correlated with documents, which would enable a more precise reconstruction of the creation of artworks. My goal for the future researchers is to take a very close look at a few cases with actual artworks preserved. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for this very interesting and very informative talk. So we will have the answering of the questions later. And now we will move on. And as I can see in the chat, that unfortunately our next speaker is not here now, but will be in the afternoon.
No, I will share his presentation now. He sent us the presentation.
Okay. So you are going
yes.
to
present the author and I will share his presentation.
Wonderful. Yeah, so the author of the next presentation is Matko Marucic. He is a research associate at the Institute of Art History in Zagreb, in Croatia. He earned his PhD from the postgraduate program of medieval studies at the University of Zagreb in 2019. His research focuses on the devotional culture of the Adriatic region in the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, with particular emphasis on the topographical reconstructions of the Holy Land. The verse inscriptions on monumental crosses, and the afterlives of medieval objects of devotion up to the 19th century. He has published in journals such as Zeitschrift für Kunstgeschichte, Convivium, Studia Serrania, and others. And currently, he is preparing a monograph on the wooden sculpture of the Venero region, which is the Upper Adriatic, from around 1300 to 1550. And the title of the presentation is The Afterlife of Polychromy Pseudo-sumptuous Surfaces of the 15th Century Venetian Wooden Sculpture in the Adriatic. Yeah, so I think now Isabel will present.
Hello, and thank you very much for accepting my paper and letting me present it in this way. So my project discusses the multi-phased approaches to the surface of the 15th and early 16th century wooden sculpture, which was executed mostly by Venetian workshop for the clientele of the minor centers of the Adriatic region. The project examines the cases of wooden statues that imitated metalwork through their glittering surfaces by considering both the place of such works in their time, but also their afterlives, given that their original appearance was regularly altered in the following centuries. The sparkling effect of the pseudo-sumptuous surfaces was replaced by polychromy that covered the draperies in natural colors imbued with religious symbolism. I will also consider instances of the reverse approach, given that several late medieval artworks were repainted to mimic bronze or even marble. These converging approaches to the surface of wooden sculpture also tackle the issue of taste and the meaning of surface in the reception of sacred art in an extensive time frame. It, of course, goes without saying that understanding the original appearance of medieval and Renaissance polychrome wooden sculpture is a rather challenging task, only to grasp with the help of thorough technical research. As a general rule, the periodic application of newly painted layers to the surface of older statues has significantly altered the intended presentation of the formal qualities and the plasticity of saintly figures. Occasionally, such an approach has entirely distorted their visual presence. In many regions, this memorable effect of the richly folded draperies enlivened completely in gold has been a constant in the production of sacred art in wood made in different epochs. But the reception of late medieval pseudo-sumptuous surfaces in a more extensive time, but also geographical frame, deserves further attention. For instance, Mattia Vinco, in a recent discussion of the wooden sculpture produced in early Renaissance Verona, remarked that the original gilded surface of the holy figures has rarely been altered in subsequent centuries. According to Vinco, the gilding was the prime reason for the high esteem the simulacra of Virgin and Child were held in by their Veronese beholders. Yet, the approaches to the polychromy of sacred art significantly varied from region to region, with a near total lack of comparative studies. For example, The flattering surfaces of the holy figures preserved in the Eastern Adriatic area, which I will discuss in my paper, could have been cherished only by the first generation of viewers, given that it was entirely, almost as a rule, obfuscated by the subsequent layers of paint. My short paper explores several such cases by analyzing the different approaches to the surface of the wooden sculpture preserved on the mostly insular territories of the Eastern Adriatic coast. By so doing, I aim to gain a fuller understanding of the meaning of the surface of sculpture made from wood, at the same time tackling the issue of taste and the expectations beholders had regarding the older sacred art up until the beginning of the 19th century, and this is more or less the outline of my presentation. The group of altarpieces and independent statues of saints that I will investigate were mostly products of Venetian shops, such as that of Andrea da Murano and Paolo Camsa, to name just the most versatile ones. Most clients of their ready-to-sell products were church authorities, confraternities, or individuals from the minor centers of Venetian Stato da Mare. The procurement of the sculptures directly in Venice or dispatched via sea from Venetian shops has rarely left traces in the archival sources. However, we can assume that in local communities for which the works were destined, these made in Venice products were perceived as lavish and high-quality works of foreign carvers. This sentiment probably supported by the memorable visual effect of the surface, given that such works drew on the medieval tradition of altarpieces, whose surface was made entirely of silver and gold, and which were held in great esteem in the wider Adriatic region. Within these premises, my paper will examine the technical data from the restoration work on selected 15th and 16th century objects from Pula, Cres, Sadar, Tisno, and Kotor, both in their original state, centuries after they were made, but also in their present state, given that this original effect of glittering surface has in many cases been restored. The development of the altarpiece as an independent and probably most important genre of late medieval art has become much clearer thanks to recent art historical research. However, the lines of evolution and chronology are far less certain and specific in minor regions, where commissioners preferred full volume sculptures instead of paintings on panels until the mid-16th century. Judging by the surviving artworks, the visual culture of late medieval Adriatic was mixed, given that in the 15th and 16th centuries, the altars were equally graced by paintings on panels and carved altarpieces, but also full volume sculptures. The first option was predominant in the central and southern parts, while the northern area primarily cherished sculpted works. A somewhat parallel line of the altarpiece typology can also be traced to 14th century, and this is altar retables made of silver, with few surviving examples, such as those from cathedrals of Split, preserved in fragments, and Cathedral of Krk. Such a genre of sacred art was distinctive only to financially most adept commissioners and communities. The silver altarpieces regularly displayed saintly figures in two registers, with the Virgin and Child as the central representation. Placed on the altars under suffused natural light and in the proximity of flickering candlelight, the effect such works left on the viewers must have been memorable. The sensation was most certainly supported by the awe the altarpieces caused after their protective shutters were lifted, which occurred exclusively on the most solemn day of the church calendar. Most of the time, however, they remained covered. For this paper, it is essential to note that the 15th century wood carving shops clearly emulated the typology of silver altarpieces. One of the key examples of this is the Pula polychtych, executed for the high altar of the Franciscan church in the second half of the 15th century, probably by a Venetian workshop. The gilding covers most of the object's surface and all the draperies of the holy figures, with the exception of Christ's perizoma, painted in white, in the upper central panel showing the Imago Pietatis. The present state of the Pula polychtych is compromised by several restorations in its modern and recent history, which have resulted in the porcelain-like appearance of the face. Nevertheless, the overall intended glittering appearance of the piece is genuine. This nexus between the production practices of goldsmiths and woodcarvers, as well as the fluidity between these media, is critical for the problem under consideration. One of the key pieces of evidence of the collaboration in the years around 1500 is the Virgin with Child from Tisno. The surface of this wooden sculpture is encased in a thin silver revetment, and only the yellowish skin of the two holy figures is left visible. It has firstly been presumed that the silver cover was not original, that is, that it was added to the wooden core of the piece at an unknown point in time. Such a practice can be traced in older and venerable icons painted on panels, and this practice was also widespread in Dalmatia, with numerous icons still retaining the silver revetment. Such additions, which were regularly ex voto offerings of pious individuals or groups, left only the skin on the Virgin and Child visible, given that no alterations to the faces of holy figures were allowed. However, it has been determined that the Tisno Madonna was initially conceived with this silver cover on its surface. The piece in question thus not only mimicked the precious material by the illusionistic drapery. On the contrary, the object is a rare example of a transmedial accomplishment. Moreover, and in terms of chronology, this somewhat late example corroborates that the appeal for precious materials persisted well into the outset of the 16th century. However, while the glittering effect was preserved, as we have seen on the Pula Polyptych and the Tisno Madonna, most of the originally gilded wooden sculptures preserved on the Eastern Adriatic relatively soon changed their skin, even after several decades, that is, in the very first campaign of their renewal. The early modern alterations to the polychromy of Adriatic wood carving have rarely been discussed as a topic in its own right. In fact, the results of the restoration work conducted through the 20th century on wooden sculptures from the area have remained mainly unpublished or entirely unrecorded. Subsequent layers of paint have generally been eliminated, and no records of their dating and visual properties survive. It is therefore hazardous to investigate the approaches to the surface, if not through a handful of archival pre-treatment photographs. A more recent approach, thankfully, pays considerable attention to the long lives of wooden sculpture, but unfortunately, the results remain largely unpublished. Regarding the varied approaches to the surface of sacred art in wood, take, for example, the surviving relief figures from the early to mid-15th century triptych from the town of Cres. The middle-sized altarpiece, whose frame is long lost, is stylistically proximate to the wood carving circles of the Moronzone family. No less than 6 layers of paint applied after the original one was determined in the 2 restoration campaigns conducted in different time periods. So the first, in the late 1980s, involved only the central figure of Virgin and Child, while the second one, from 2006, concerned the side figures Saint Fabian and Sebastian. The draperies, as can still be seen on the central figure, were originally gilded, but the said layer has survived only in traces. Therefore, the decision was to present the 3rd consecutive layer of overpaint on the side figures. Probes of 2 earlier and the subsequent layers were left visible both on the draperies and the inkernet. The bureaucrat therefore apprehends that through time, the tone of the inkernet was also changed, but with no compelling impact on the visual qualities of the figures. On the contrary, the subsequent layers on the draperies, brown, green, blue, and white, significantly altered the intended visual effect of the anonymous carver of the Cres triptych. The same procedure of the alterations to the surface can be traced on several other relief sculptures, such as the Madonna and Child from Cres, signed by Andrea da Murano and dated by inscription to the 1470s. Unfortunately, the last digit of the number of the year is effaced. Gilded draperies were also characteristic of the full volume sculpture. Again, there is no need to look further from the sculptures of the same town. For instance, this large monumental simulacrum of Saint Isidore, the patron saint of town, which is represented seated on the throne. Recent technical investigation, which have not yet been published, revealed that the original surface was also gilded, and it was rendered decisively more lavish than the present reddish paint, which was, at least according to the sources, applied during the first half of the 20th century, so fairly recently. To what extent the illusion of richer material pertinent to the media of sculpture is best illustrated by Virgin and Child from Vigan, probably dating from the last quarter of the 15th century. Scholars have argued that the pose of the child erected on the Virgin slab with a thin and transparent perizoma, whose end also serves as Mary's peplum with which she wipes the tears, is of Mantegnesque inspiration. The comparison with some of the most celebrated compositions by Andrea Mantegna, such as the San Zeno altarpiece finished in 1959, is telling. The circulation of compositions between the masters of different specializations is, of course, well known, but for the purposes of this paper, it is important to underline that when the model was translated from painting to sculpture, the naturalistic treatment of drapery was replaced with gilding. In such a setting, the Vigan Madonna lost some of the main qualities of its Renaissance model, and I apologize for the low quality of the photograph of Vigan Madonna. The question of style, some of you may object, is crucial here, but I will comment upon it only briefly. It is crucial because by the middle of the 16th century, gilded surfaces of Venetian sculpture became much rarer than before. At least part of the reason why this effect of sculptures was changed in their first renewal lies in, generally speaking, a change of taste and different expectations of the appearance of sacred art. This can be corroborated by sculptures that were not originally gilded, such as the beautiful Madonna from Tres, produced in some Central European workshop in the first decades of the 15th century. The Virgin's robe was originally white, gilded on the inside, with a thin golden border running along the rich cascade folds dotted with lilies. The effect did not change drastically in the first two repainting campaigns, as you see on the color schemes, but was gradually completely annulled by the 19th century. In the research carried out in 15 years ago, important discovery was also this pergamena with Hebrew letters underneath the polychromy on the crown of Virgin, but the research on this is still very much ongoing. Finally, and returning to our general problem, it must be emphasized that renewing the gilded surface was a complex and decisively more expensive task, which is another circumstance which could have conditioned the described alterations to the surface of sculptures. The afterlife of late medieval polychrome wooden sculpture in Adriatic, however, was not straightforward, as could be inferred by the cases analyzed thus far. Indeed, it had a peculiar twist, considering that the surface of several sculptures was altered reversely, so from naturalistic surfaces to mimic precious material. Yet, the desired effect was rarely that of gold, but rather that of bronze or marble. Among the instances of such practice, the older and venerable crucifixes can be singled out. For instance, this large late 14th century crucifix from Kotor in Montenegro, and the somewhat smaller mid to late 15th century crucifix from Poreč, for which only the head survives. Although neither of the objects was originally gilded, they were similarly transformed into objects made of bronze. The practice in question seems to have been exclusive to monumental wooden crucifixes, as attested by the analogous cases in the Veneto region. It is presumed that the desire to possess bronze crucifixes in Padua was fueled by the revered status of Donatello's bronze crucifix from the Basilica of Sant'Antonio, executed in 1440s. This crucifix from Padua changed several locations within the interior of the basilica, and the new loincloth was added in the 17th century. The more nuanced understanding of how the material of the 15th century Paduan crucifix was emulated by dozens of crucifixes across Veneto, Istria, and the Adriatic, mainly in the 18th and also first half of the 19th century, remains to be studied more thoroughly, and this is one of the lines of future research. Admittedly, there was also a practical side to the practice. New polychromy needed not to pay attention to the slightest detail of the rendering of the skin of Christ, his wounds, or the expression and the passion on the face. The same was true for wooden sculptures covered in white to imitate marble or stone. The practice, again, seems exclusive to the sculptures divorced from their original altar setting and employed as architectural sculpture. For example, the figures of the apostles executed in the 1420s for the choir screen of the Zadar Cathedral by Matteo Moronzone and gilded by Giovanni da Milano several years later in 1431 were set atop the pilasters of central nave of the cathedral, probably in the 18th century. So in blue, you see a schematic appearance of their original placement, and in red, their subsequent placement in the church. The same procedure was applied to other 15th century sculptures, such as the sculpture of Saint Jerome, which originally adorned the high altar of the Franciscan church, and this statue and others from the same ensemble were returned to the pristine appearance after the restoration campaign, and the alterations to a marble-like surface is recorded on archival photographs. Again, the reasons for a radically different approach to the surface were conditioned by the new role the older sculptures acquired in the early modern period. However, while in later cases, the new painted layer was entirely practical, so a wooden sculpture ought to imitate stone. In the case of crucifixes, it must be considered that the Cotter crucifix was highly revered and considered miraculous. The emulation of bronze must therefore be also understood in such an environment, not exclusively as a reasonably cheap way of renewing centuries-old wooden sculpture, but also, possibly, a result of reverence to the image of Christ from Cotter. In conclusion, I would say that the alterations to the surface of sacred art in wood through the centuries can generally be understood as purely practical. However, even if subsequent layers of paint were rendered in much lower quality than the original, there was constant intention to introduce alterations and novelties to the chromatic palettes of sculptures. These alterations, more prominently, entirely effaced the glittering effect of saints, which was then replaced by a more naturalistic palette of draperies. With several cases that cannot be understood under this interpretative strand, primarily that of crucifixes that were painted in such a way to imitate bronze, I aim to underscore that new polychromy, which is customarily considered of lower quality and therefore sidelined in literature, could have been the critical step in the prolonged life of medieval sculpture. Indeed, while it is often remarked that the changes in the style of wooden sculptures were moderate to minor, the same cannot be argued for their frequently changed skin. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much for this very interesting, very informative talk. Yes, there's a really warm welcome to the audience to put your questions in the chat. So you, as I mentioned earlier, you already can put your questions in the chat during the presentation. But now let's go on, and I would like to present the last talk of this session. It's a joint paper presented by Federica Carta and Camille Ambrosino. So let's welcome our next two speakers. Federica Carter is lecturer at the Department of Art History and Archaeology at Sorbonne University and an associate member at Crame, I hope I pronounce it correctly, at the University of Amiens. Her PhD thesis looks in Paprika, the architectural decoration in glazed terracotta by Luca and Andrea della Robbia, about 1500, defended in June 2022 at the University of Amiens and Perugia, received an award from the Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art in 2023. As a research fellow at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York in 2022 to 2023, she studied the museum's collection of Italian Renaissance glazed terracotta works. And Gabi Ambrosino is currently in her 5th year of a doctorate in the history of medieval art under the supervision of Claudio Di Fabio and Philippe Sénéchal. She works on medieval and Renaissance Italy as part of her joint thesis entitled Les couleurs en flux, incrustation et application de la sculpture en pierre figurative en Italie septentrionale et centrale, from 1220 to 1470. She was a research fellow at the Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art in Paris. The title of the talk is Light, Surfaces and Materials, Sculpting the Imperceptible. So we are very happy that you're here and we are looking forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, before we begin, we would like to thank the organizer for accepting our paper. The polychromy created by the use of colored materials was intended to glorify and celebrate God. The practice was common in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. It gave creation a luxurious and precious appearance. Polychromy in paint, but also and above all in the material used, played a full part in the visual strategies designed to immerse the faithful and increase their devotion. The colors that originally enhanced medieval and Renaissance sculpture played an important role in making the theological and aesthetic significance of the work fully apparent. The medieval approach to material sculpture bear witness to the thought that artists and their workshop gave to the importance of the choice of materials. For these reasons, varietas, in other words, the multiplicity of elements assembled with skill and virtuosity in relation to one another, as well as polychromy and ornamentation, were essential. These polymaterial creations accentuated the vividness of the sculpture and sublimated the representation from both an aesthetic and spiritual point of view. By explaining it, the figures reinforced their encourage in the early works. The variety of surface and light effect, the diversity of materials and their colors function as the stimulus and activate meditation through sensory experience. That more particularly in the late Middle Ages, polymateriality and polychromy confronted the faithful with the spiritual dimension of the sculpture. Varietas thus enable the quest for the divine world. The relationship with the sight and more specifically with the light is an important issue in this type of polymaterial work. The use of glass or a majolica insert is omnipresent in Tuscan artistic production. Thanks to the diversity of their surface effect, smooth, shiny, matte, they enhance the representation from both an aesthetic and spiritual point of view. Like stained glass windows, the sculpture offered shimmering colors that varied according to the time of day, and the light source, helping to reading of the episodes in elided. The relationship between materials and light underwent a remarkable evolution in 14th and 15th century Tuscan art. Painted glass and ceramics were used to increase the naturalistic and narrative rendering of relief. Were destined for a religious building, such as the Formule on the Campanile of Florence, or the Madonna del Perdono, originally placed on the southern entrance to Siena Cathedral, or the domestic interiors, such as the Madonna and the Child, known as the Madonna Goretti Miniati, allow us to study the technical means used, the enhanced space, depth, and figures in order to activate the tense and making the spiritual message tangible. Luca della Robbia's invention of glazed terracotta marks a profound renewal in the polymateriality. The question of the use of the images in devotion has been an established area of research for a century. The devotional image had it emerged in the late Middle Ages and defined by Erwin Panofsky as a characteristic by a combination of specific format and function. Hans Belting, for his part, has shown that the Imago Pietatis can serve sacramental as well as devotional purpose, and that the traditional distinction between ecclesiastical people faithful and private domestic devotion is not strict practice. Against the presupposition the image have a function, these studies show that their meaning is a construct through practice and used. To understand how a polymaterial image object function, particularly those with the vitrified inclusion, we need to take into account the natural significance, symbolic or social, and a function, liturgical, of the place occupied by the image. Take, for example, the Madonna and the Child known as the Madonna Goretti Miniati. Like the many relief Madonna for the private devotion, the Madonna Goretti Miniati show the named Virgin carrying the infant Jesus in her arms. Both alone with the window, they are seen in the three-quarter and a low angle. The window, materialized and designed by the blue glass insert, had the primary purpose of visual marking the space. Against the deep blue ground, the two figures stand out thanks to the luminous effect of the blue light, allowing the faithful to meditate on the about model of the model of filial and maternal love. For the people of the Middle Ages, the richness of the material encouraged the effectiveness of the devotional content of the image. The blue glass inserts accentuate the sensitive dimension of the images. In this sense, through their performativity, this figure produced a mental image in the faithful that gave the object in animation. Associated with the sapphire, blue is the frontier between light and matter. In the Old Testament, this precious stone had a direct link with the God and the celestial spheres. In the presence of this image, the faithful was confronted with a celestial vision that came to life at a flame of the candle move other inlay area. The attribution of this relief is not entirely certain. The inserts indicate a source close to Donatello or Michelozzo, both the warmth enjoyed experimenting with the materials. For example, the blue glass that lean back of the room create an architectural setting. Reminds me of the Madonna del Perdono, now in the Museo dell'Opera in Siena. Not entirely autographed, the Madonna del Perdono is an important object in Donatello's catalog. Among all his surviving Marian relief, this tondo is the only one that commissioned and designed not for private domestic use, but for a monumental public display. It is precisely for this reason that Donatello elevates the Marian image in the project as always is out the ordinary and pose the real optical challenge in the viewer. Comfortably seated, the Virgin Mary is depicted in the three-quarter view, with the child seated on her mother legs. Presented in the celestial kingdom, several cherubs signified simply by their head. This is the glory to Mary and the child Jesus could only be partially seen by the faithful, who they are looking up on the scene constrained by the round frame. The tondo, similar to the oculus, function at the window into Mary's kingdom, only half revealing the scene. They reinforce the structure of the oculus. Donatello and his workshop decorated depth of the circular pieces with the blue glass inserts forming the caisson. In addition to their ornamental function, this glass inclusion creates an illusory three-dimensional effect that could be appropriated from the point of view of the faithful passing through the doorway leading the Chapel of the Graces. The glass insert creates an effect of perspective. In the apparition, the Virgin is described as surmounted by a beautiful celestial radiance. Ornamentation was thus used as a means of honoring the Virgin contained in this image. When the faithful entered in the chapel, the Virgin painted the glass panel sparkly and illuminated by the natural light and the oil lamp placed around them in the church. The special nature of this light system evoked the presence of the god and became an indicator of holiness. The importance of the liturgical and social context in particular should be emphasized, as the image to help define the sacred space and contribute to the performance of the liturgical ritual. They help the artist to choose the materials for the sculpture, thinking about the effect on once in place. Then the campanile of Santa Maria del Fiore cycles was conceived as a scholastic and humanistic cycles based on an Aristotelian schema that reconcile the requirement of the Christian faith and the affirmation of being at a universal reality according to the doctrine of Saint Thomas Aquinas. In this cycle, each relief, whether hexagonal or lozenge-shaped, is linked to a human activity or an art that is revolved as an essential element in the vocation to know God. In this way, the early skills were arranged in hexagonal relief, the bottom of which were painted in blue. apart from the architecture, there are no inlay in any relief at this level. The program was perhaps the 13th century writing of Vincent de Beauvais, the Specula, which is divided reality into 4 mirrors capable of reflecting a celestial truth. The mirror of nature, the moral mirror, the mirror of education, and finally, the mirror of history. For this reason, polymateriality has been reserved for the losange relief to relate to the celestial and spiritual sphere. The losange represents the planet, west side, the virtue, south side, the liberal art, east side, and the sacrament, north side. The choice we made to replace the painted background with the insert of Glace's blue majolica is for help the faithful can see where the terrestrial and celestial sphere are located. What's more, the deep blue used in is a so-called light blue. In other words, it is very luminous by nature. Therefore allow the marble relief to stand out from the background and bring out of the modeling. Finally, it is hardly likely that majolica was preferred for a reason of solidity. Exposed to elements and outdoors, the very fragile glass would become detached, tarnished, and broken. Glaze majolica, with the same property of mutability, present a very similar visual effect and remain a robust material.
So the polymaterial experience in sculpture and architectural ornament is an essential element to understand Luca della Robbia's models and aims in developing his new technique, the glazed terracotta sculpture. The technique is in fact a combination of terracotta sculpture and majolica glaze. It consists in applying to the sculpture after the first firing a thin glaze charge with metallic oxides, and then to proceed to a second firing. The glazes are close to the ones used for archaic majolica, but with some differences. The result is a glossy and lasting surface with a quite large palette, but two favorite colors, a brilliant and luminous white and a deep blue. The direct link between Luca's invention and the precedent or coeval polymaterial sculpture that Camille just presented is easy to see in the first documented and dated use of glazed terracotta, the tabernacle today in Santa Maria Peretola next to Florence. The structure and the figurative sculpture indeed is in white marble, and its relationship with the blue background is identical to the relief of the campanile. The interest of artists and patrons at the beginning of the 15th century in the rich effects of materials as ceramics or glass inserts certainly is an important piece in the understanding of both the reason that pushed Luca to research this new technique and the success he obtained. This new material, however, also goes with a radical shift. The glazed terracotta indeed allows the sculpture to achieve the effect of brilliance, luminosity, and richness with only one material. In this way, the research of varietas obtained by different materials seems to leave the place to the research of brightness. The symbolic and religious values associated with the bright whites of glazed sculpture have been deeply analyzed by Carlo del Bravo, Giancarlo Gentilini, and most recently by Catherine Kupiec. To briefly resume those studies, Carlo del Bravo linked the glazed whiteness to with Marsilio Ficino's De Lumine, where the white color is associated to light. Giancarlo Gentilini, in turn, compared Luca's white glaze with San Bernardino's Sermon, identifying the white as the color of the pure, immaculate soul. Building on this interpretation and on Geraldine Johnson's attention to the impact of candlelight, Katrin Kupiec brought new attention to the complex interplay between glazed white and light. All those elements resonate very well with some relief, with the Virgin and Child, in which the child is holding a scroll with the inscription Ego sum lux mundi, I am the light of the world. The link between the religious message and the material used is indeed extremely strong and almost transparent. However, I'd like to focus to another model largely overlooked for glazed terracotta, the stained glass. During the years Luca spent working in marble for the Florentine Cathedral, indeed, the completion of the stained glasses for the core and the oculi of the dome was also going on. To study this connection, I will focus on the decorative program of the Pazzi Chapel in the first cloister of Santa Croce in Florence. This example will also contribute to a better understanding of the complex role of Filippo Brunelleschi in the ornamental project of this chapel. In fact, the construction began about 1429-1430, but the building was still in progress in the 1450s. The inner dome was covered in 1459, and the small dome of the portico on the outside in 1461. As Filippo Brunelleschi died in 1446, more than a decade before the achievement, many concerns have arisen about the respect of his original project. However, it is almost commonly accepted that the interior of the building follows his project, while the exterior porch with its small dome is a later addition. The interior of the chapel shows the typical sober contrast between dark gray structural elements in pietra serena and the white walls, only enhanced by the 12 glazed terracotta medallions in white and blue showing the apostles. The frieze is decorated with painted stucco with cherubs and Agnus Dei, and in the square apse, the window has a stained glass with St. Andrew, surmounted by a roundel with God the Father, and the central space is covered by a dome with 12 oculi, and the pendentives are filled with polychrome medallions showing the 4 evangelists. The attribution of the apostles to Luca makes no doubt, even if the dating is difficult, while the evangelists are more problematic, but I will address this question later. So the apostles are entirely white, seated on clouds against a blue background, and in the 4 oldest medallion on the east wall, probably made in the 1440s, this background is made with concentric circles of different shades of blue, going from the lightest in the middle toward the darkest on the exterior. The remaining 8 medallions, slightly later, have uniform blue backgrounds. The shades of blue clearly respond to the light, not the natural source as taught by Carlo del Bravo, but on the light of the figures themselves, as currently pointed out by Katrin Kupiec. The apostles are thus the source of light of the chapel. This function reinforces the symbolic link to the 12 oculi in the dome, a symbolic number also adopted by Brunelleschi in the comparable project of the old sacristy in San Lorenzo. If we consider the glazed terracotta medallion as a projection on the wall of the oculi, the link to the stained glass window becomes stronger, and the formal element seems to further reinforce this point. In fact, in my opinion, the concentric circles of the background find their model in the oculi of the cathedral, both in Ghiberti's Assumption in the facade and various episodes of the Passion in the drum of the dome. Here you have the Resurrection by Paolo Uccello. The background is indeed formed by concentric circles. This proximity to the stained glass seems even more important if we consider that the only other images in the chapel are, in fact, the stained glasses of the apse. Following Brunelleschi's choice, the altar is not surmounted by any painted altarpiece, and this function is performed by the figure of St. Andrew. In her PhD, Kupiec suggested that the very simple spatial layout of the medallions of the apostles was intended to preserve the unity of the space of the chapel. In fact, I think that the material proximity between the glass and the glazed images is even more important in this sense. So this analysis led to the main question about the sculptural program of the chapel, namely the degree of involvement of Filippo Brunelleschi and the paternity of the four evangelists. So the attribution and the dating of those medallions is highly debated. John Popenesi proposed an attribution to Donatello after Brunelleschi's death. Giancarlo Gentilini, following Saint-Paulesi Argan, on the contrary, attributes the relief to Filippo Brunelleschi himself. The bright glazed terracotta evangelists would have been an answer to Donatello's relief in the Medici Hall Sacristy that, following Antonio Manetti's Brunelleschi's biography, weren't appreciated at all by Brunelleschi. If we compare the medallions in San Lorenzo and the Pazzi Evangelist, the two main differences consist in the representation of the space and the palette. Comparable to the stained glass, the Pazzi Evangelists do not interfere with the spatiality of the chapel, following Brunelleschi's prescription. In this way, the choice of naturalistic polychromy, mostly seen as antithetical to Brunelleschi's idea, would, on the contrary, reinforce the link to the stained glasses. If this hypothesis is correct, the medallions would have been modeled by Brunelleschi at some point between the decoration of the Hall Sacristy, 1442, and his death in 1446. While this is difficult to decide if Brunelleschi indeed was the modeler, there can be no doubt that polychromy belongs to Luca, the only one that possesses a sufficient technical mastery of the glazed clay at this time. Those examples, so in diverse scale, location, and condition of perception, underlines the importance given to the choice of materials. So the color palette, of course, has an important place in the construction of the image, but the effects of the surface and play with the light can only be achieved by the skilled choice of materials. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah. So thank you very much. So then we will immediately start with our discussion. I can see in the chat, there's a question from, first question from Jan Ostergaard to Mateusz Remschkar. Sorry, here it is. So the question is, have you been able to localize the bodegas within the topography of Dubrovnik and those of the suppliers of the materials needed, for example, wood?
Thank you for the question. So I have not been able to identify the suppliers. In fact, there is a lot of archival research to be done, because I know there is a lot of Marangoni mentioned in the documents, but unfortunately that would probably that will probably have to be done in a different project or a different PhD thesis, because there's a lot of documents connected to this. I will only be able to research a small aspect of this. And other questions, so localizing the bodegas. In fact, some of this has already been done. We do have documents where the government leased a place or a house inside of Dubrovnik to a painter. So some of the bodegas have been localized, and we pretty much know exactly where they were. Most of the houses, of course, there has been a war in 90s in Dubrovnik, well, not in Dubrovnik, in Yugoslavia, and Dubrovnik was really in the spotlight, and there has been a big earthquake, so we don't have an actual building, but we do have a location.
Okay. So thank you very much for your answer. So the next question in the chat to Marco. Did I understand correctly that this will be answered in the afternoon? Okay, good. Then we will proceed. Yeah, there's a question from the audience. Yeah.
Marcos?
Yes.
Thank you. Very interesting communications this afternoon, in my opinion. First, just a small comment about the last intervention, the last presentation. It concerns the importance, in my opinion, of these glazed Maiolica works of the Quattrocento, which give us a very important information about the intensity of colors that has often disappeared from medieval painted polychromy. But in my opinion, painted polychromy was as intense as the glaze, the Maiolica, which we see in Quattrocento, Florence. Another question for Mateusz. I found his communication very interesting because he talks us about the crucial question about the capacity of painters to carve in wood and the wood carvers to paint. And if I have well understood, you mentioned that this was quite common in the 15th century, but in earlier centuries it may have been a more specialized division of work, which is not what I think was the case. I studied a little bit about portal polychromy in France of the 12th and 13th centuries. We don't know who painted them, unfortunately, but as early as the beginning of the 14th century, we have some sources which tell us that the sculptors were able and did the polychromy of their work. But in other cases, it is also known that they made appeal to specialized polychromers. Which is important, I think, to retain is the fact that polychromy has never been abandoned to apprentices with minor competence, but these were always the masters who did the polychromy. May they be master sculptors or painters. So I wanted to know if you have published this work on what you presented about Dubrovnik and the names, the wood carvers and the painters and what they did, ones and the other ones. Thank you a lot.
Thanks for the question. So maybe I was not clear enough. Actually, I didn't claim that the 13th and 14th century the masters were more specialists. I agree with you. What I was trying to say is we're going toward specialization in 13th and 14th century, but in 15th century we can still see that this is still fluid. It's still not very specialized. What I think, but I don't have the documents to prove it, or enough documents yet to prove it, is that the more respected the master was, the painter or a wood carver, more specialized he was. Some masters had bodegas, I wouldn't say apprentices, worked on the polychromy. Maybe apprentices of painters worked on wood carving, but not the other way around. I do not, like I said, I don't have documents that prove that. That is just the feeling I got from reading the historical documents so far. This will be published in Conservar Patrimonio. I prepared the paper for it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think this was also there was your first comment was on the last talk by Federica and Camille. So maybe you would like to answer this. So one of you, Federica or Camille, please.
No, I totally agree with the comment. Yes, we can still see color in glazed terracotta, and it links also with the specialization in wood carving and painting, because one of the point of the glazed terracotta is that Luca can do at the same time the sculpture and the painting, and he can do his own frames for his relief. So I think all of this is linked, actually. So thank you for your comment. Not sure that was a question.
And I just want to remark for this, the intensity of the polychromy paint was painted was a very strong, but the difference comes from the glazes, which reflect the light and mark the insert sparkle. It's important to understand the effect of the light is very strong on the insert vitrified. Thank you.
Thank you. Then yeah, there's a question by Isabel, please.
Yes, it's to Mateus. I'm amazed with the amount of documents that you mentioned, because we have none or we have one or two, so I'm really amazed. I must say jealous. So do you have documents from earlier dates? That's my first question. And the second one, I would like to know, because you mentioned on one of the documents the material chalk. I would like to know if you have mentions to chalk and to gypsum, and if you have an idea of is it more gypsum or chalk?
So the mentions of gypsum and chalk are very rare because it's not in the commissions. Patrons did not talk about this, so it's not that would have to be found in a communication between a supplier and master, which unfortunately we do not really have. Yes, the Dubrovnik is very rich with documents, and the reason why we have all this documentation is because above certain amount you had to go to the notary and to everything. So after 1275, so by the end of the 13th century, all the transactions above 10 perpers had to happen through the notary. That's why we have so many documents, and the documents were always in possession of the Republic. So they were not their private documents, like in Venice, when notaries kept their documents, but they were in Republic's possession. So for difference, we don't have a lot of artwork, so that's what makes it that makes me jealous, because we know there in 15th century there were about 150 polyptychs in the Dubrovnik churches, but we have 5 polyptychs from late Middle Ages. Two of them are from later Trecento, and 3 of them are from 15th century. So that's what I'm missing to have to conclude this analysis and make it more definite.
Okay, that's very interesting, because in our documents from the 17th and 18th century and some from the 16th century, there are no mentions to any pigments, but a lot of mentions to gypsum for the preparation layers, which is interesting. So they show up a lot in the documentation. Thank you very much.
When pigments are mentioned in documents in Dubrovnik, it's usually about color blue. So whether it was azurite, indigo, and so on.
Thank you. Then there's a question by Jan, please.
Well, coming from the Greco-Roman world, I can also only envy you all in having such a incredible written evidence of what goes on. But I wanted to give a comment and ask a question. The first comment has to do with this relationship between the painter and the sculptor, because in a Greek and Roman context, this is an ongoing, really important question: who did the carving and who did the painting? And the trend is that the sculptor may well have done, including Phidias for that matter, may well have done the polychromy as well, because in any case we can see that a very close dialogue would have been necessary between the sculptor and the painter to achieve the final results, where many details were only given in painting. So obviously they had to work very closely together. So this is why I'm actually following this conference with such a great interest, because what you have in the way of analogies is really important for our interpretation in a Greco-Roman context. Then there is the question for Mateusz is, you talked about you have localized, but I just want to ask whether you also have an idea of the proximity of these boutiques to one another. I know that work has been done on Donatello's workshops in Firenze, and I mean, this is a chaîne au brassoir, you might say. It's really interesting to know, Mateusz, whether you know anything about how in what proximity they were to one another, these boutiques. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Unfortunately, I do not have a good quality answer for you. A lot of research has been done to Apennine Peninsula production. I'm avoiding the term Italy, but almost none of the researchers concerned with Italian production looked at the East Adriatic region.
Excuse me for interrupting you, Mateusz, but I was thinking within Dubrovnik, within the city, how close were the boutiques to one another?
So, okay, yeah, excuse me. So we have to know that Dubrovnik was so small that we cannot even talk about numerous bodegas. As soon as Blaž Jurjo, so Biagio di Giorgio de Trau left Dubrovnik, we begin to notice numerous documents mentioning Ivan Ugrinović, so Johannes Zornea. And it looks like that he was almost waiting for his turn for Blaž to leave Dubrovnik so he could start making more valuable commissions. So I think we cannot really talk about numerous bodegas working at the same time in Dubrovnik.
Just one. Okay. So it was
basically, or
yeah,
or maybe two, but one very strong, and then other bodegas that were always involved with things like coloring chests, some small woodworking, maybe some pictures of Madonnas, but that's it, not altarpieces.
Thank you very much for your work, Mateus.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Are there any more questions this time to our presenters? Because I think we are already a little bit over time. I think that's okay, I hope. And if not, I think you can already you can still write questions in the chat, and maybe the presenters will answer them in the chat. So again, a very warm thank you to everybody who has presented in this session. It was really very interesting and informative and very inspiring. And I think we had a really good discussion now. Yeah, I would say to be continued. And yeah, have a good break and see you in the afternoon.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for all your work, and to the presenters. And we will meet again at 2 Lisbon time. And so have a nice break. See you then. Bye.